Hello everyone. Once again, welcome back to your English class. I'm Jasmine and this is the 40th module. In this module, we are going to continue with the chapter The Enemy, written by Pearl S. Buck and taken from the book Vistas. In the previous module, we saw Sadao making plans with the general to kill the American whom they consider as their enemy. Now let's continue reading in order to find out whether those plans really worked out. As you read further, you can see after the meeting with the general, Sadao did not let any thought enter his mind as he went into the room where the American man lay asleep. He was surprised to see the man out of his bed. He was getting ready to go out into the garden. Sadao was shocked as he asked him that who had permitted him to stand and walk. Tom was happy and said that he was not in a habit of taking permission before doing anything. He said that he felt good again, just the muscles on the sides of his body were stiff and rigid. Sadao was surprised to hear that. He forgot all work and said that he had warned the man not to stand and walk. He lifted the man's shirt and inspected the scar. He said that massage could heal it if it would not be healed by exercise. Thus the man said that the scar would not trouble him. His young bearded face was weak. He thanked Sadao and said that if he had not reached Sadao that day, then he would have died. He further added that if all the Japanese people would have been like Sadao, then the war would not have happened. Sadao replied that maybe that could be true, and he also added that the man should go to sleep. And thus he helped the man lay in bed, bowed to him, and said good night. Further in the story, you can see how disturbed was Sadao. Sadao was restless all through the night as he felt that the hired killers were there to kill the man. He imagined hearing the sound of footsteps, branches being broken, stones moving as men walked on them, and imagined that he heard such a noise which indicated that some men were carrying the American's dead body. All this anxiety kept him awake. The next early morning Sadao made an excuse to go into the American man's room first. He had planned that if the man was gone, then he would tell Hana that the general had ordered for him to be removed from there. When he opened the door, he saw the man who had lots of yellowish colored hair was asleep. He could hear the sound of his breathing. Thus Sadao closed the door of the room. Further, Sadao says Hana that the man was asleep and was well and did not need to sleep like that. Here you can see Hana again asking that what they should do with the man. Thus Sadao shook his head and promised her that he would decide it in 1 or 2 days. Sadao thought that perhaps the killers would come the next night. The night was windy. He heard the sounds made by the branches as they bent due to the wind, and the partitions made whistling sound as the wind passed through them. That night Hana woke up and asked that should they close the partition door of the man's room. For that Sadao refused and said that the man was capable to do that for himself. The next day also Sadao went anxiously into the room, and he saw the American man was still there in the room. As you read further, you can see Sadao was hopeful that they might come on the third night. But that night, instead of the wind, there was rain. The garden was full of noises as the water dripped down the roof and tiny rivulets flowed through the garden. Sadao slept little and jumped as he heard a loud noise. Hana also heard the loud crash and asked what it was. The baby also woke up and started crying. Hannah wanted to go and check on it, but Sadao stopped her. Hannah screamed at him and asked what the matter was. Sadao spoke slowly and asked her not to go. He was scared, and his scare affected Hannah too. She stood without breathing and waited. There was silence, and both of them crawled back into the bed, with the baby lying on the bed in between them. In the next morning Sadao went into the guest room and saw the man was still there. He was happy and had taken his bath and had started moving around. He had borrowed a razor from Sadao the previous day and had shaved his beard. The color of his cheeks was slightly pinkish, which indicated that he was recovering and regaining good health. As soon as he saw Sadao, he announced happily that he was well. Sadao wrapped his traditional Japanese gown around his tired body. He was tired because the anxiety had kept him awake for 2 consecutive nights. He decided that he could not pass one more night in such a way. He was not bothered about the man's life, but he could not bear the stress and anxiety any longer. In this section of the story you can see Sadao said to the man that he was well now. Further he lowered his voice and said that he was strong enough to sail a boat. Sadao planned that if he arranged a boat, stock it with food and extra clothing, the man would be able to row it to the nearby island. As the island was so close to the coast, it had not been guarded. It was not inhabited as it sunk into the sea during the storms. As it was not the season of storms at that time, the man could live on the island until he spotted a Korean fishing boat pass by. The Korean fishing boats passed near the islands as the sea was very deep there. The young man stared at Sadao as he understood his words. He asked that was it necessary for him to do so. Further you can see Sadao pleading that he must understand that the fact that the man was living at his house was known to everyone. The young man agreed with him and said okay. He moved his head to indicate his acceptance. Now let's wind it up here. Let's wait and see whether Sadao will be able to save the man's life one more time. I hope the session was helpful. Thank you.